For this project, you may want to make some graphite powder to use. In order to do that, I'm going to use a 3B pencil, and I'm also going to use a block of sandpaper that I happen to have. So if you happen to have some sandpaper lying around the house, you can use any kind. I think coarser would be better than fine because it would get the job done more quickly. And I'm just sanding this away, making some graphite powder. You can see it's a little time consuming, but it's fun to work with, so you may want to make some. Now, you can purchase graphite powder pre-made and store, a big art supply store like Blick or Art Supply Warehouse that really specializes in fine arts materials. They would have graphite powder for you to purchase. So you may want to look into that if this is something that you really love. Otherwise, you can just experiment with a little bit. As you can see, I just used my X-Acto knife to trim back my pencil and expose quite a bit more graphite here. And I'm going to just keep working on making more of that graphite powder on my sandpaper. This also, by the way, is a great way to sharpen your pencil. So you can look at my pencil point now, and by turning it and rubbing it on the sandpaper like that, you would get a nice sharp point. So, looks like you got the idea how to do that. And when we spread this graphite powder, you would want to have like an old watercolor brush will work just fine for that. So at this point, I've made a little pile here that I'll be able to work with, and I really don't want my wood chips mixed up with that. So, before I start using my graphite powder, I need to finish laying out this drawing. And I'm not getting into the details too much right now, but just enough around the head because that's going to be my focal point. I have sped this video up twice the amount of speed as I usually draw, so I don't want you to think that I really draw as fast as this video looks. Right now I'm just very lightly putting in some of the designs for the bandana. I am working with an HB pencil here. You can also see that I'm using a cover sheet, and that's really because I don't want my hand to smudge the graphite. Okay. Whenever I work more quickly, I'll take off the cover sheet. And now I'm just going around the outlines of some of the tufts of fur on Arlo's chest. You can see there's some wavy parts, and I just want to make a note of that. Now, at this point too, I don't want to get too detailed and I don't want to do too much shading because I'm going to need to erase the grid lines, and but I do want to get enough detail in so it almost acts like a map. So as I'm drawing later and I'm shading without the grid, I have a good sense of where I am. So he's got a lot of those wavy curls around his chest that I wanted to get in, and since the face, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, that's the focal point, I do want to include quite a few details on his chest, so that's why I was kind of working up that area. And now I noticed how the fur on his leg parts a little bit, where that rabbit's arm is sitting. So again, always draw with the direction that the fur is growing. And there I can see the separation between two of his legs, and the fur comes to kind of a V shape right there. Now on his leg on the right side, some of the fur goes to the left, and then some fur goes to the right. And so I'm just drawing that in there right now. Cleaning up the bunny's eyes a little bit more shading there where the back hip is. And now it's time to erase. Uh, while I'm erasing my grid lines, I do want to use the white vinyl eraser. That's going to erase the lines as much as possible for you. And I'm pushing down really pretty hard, trying to get all those lines totally erased. I don't want any evidence that I gridded this drawing later. So the grid really, it acts like a sighting device, you know? When we're drawing from observation and we hold our pencils out and see where things line up vertically and then check where things are horizontally, the grid works exactly like that. But after you lay out the drawing, there's no need to have it. You know, you just want to get rid of it. So at the end of the drawing, you won't be able to see the grid at all. As you can see, it leaves these little erasure crumbs all over the drawing. I'm not dealing with that yet. But after I erase all the grid lines as much as I can, I'm going to go back in with the tissue and just kind of lightly dust everything off with the tissue. All right, now in this drawing, I really am not building up the masses of shadows gradually. I'm laying them on very lightly with a softer pencil. So I'm using a 4B pencil, and I know that area is going to get really dark. It's, you know, on the rug there, it's darker on the bottom. There, Arlo's hair on the side of his head is really quite dark. I've got my pencil sharpened with a X-Acto knife to expose a lot of the graphite. Here I'm using a tissue to blend that together. Okay, don't use your hands to do any blending on the drawing. The grease on your hands is not good for the paper. Now I'm putting a little bit of that rug texture in. I looked at the direction of the weaving right in there, and I'm just suggesting it. So I'm not trying to draw the rug, you know, 100% accurate. That's not my focal point. Now I'm just blocking in a little bit more of the shading there on Arlo's chest, side of his head, and then the bottom of his ears, a little dark. I noticed that there. And I'm still using a soft pencil, and this is either a 3B or a 4B. I think I'm using a 3B at this point. You see how I have the pencil gripped? I'm holding it really pretty far back, so the reason I'm doing that is I just want a lot of movement as I'm shading. And I'm going back in with the tissue, and again, you want to make sure that the tissue you're using, that it doesn't have any kind of lotion on it at all. That would be really bad for the paper too. So here, the floor is kind of lighter back there, so I used a 3B pencil just to do some very, very light hatching. I'm hatching, but I'm hatching with the side of the pencil, so I'm getting thicker, broader strokes, and I'm also not pushing down too hard. So I'm using softer pencils to build up value. They're easier to smudge. So, you know, I noticed in the photo, it's quite dark in the back of Arlo's head. I don't know if I want to get it that dark there, you know, because it's kind of this random black shape back there. So I may end up just not copying that exactly. Here, I'm cleaning up some of the designs on the scarf. Just get the scarf there a little bit darker. And then that's the fold in the scarf. And I'm just looking at the shape of that fold. There I'm getting the edges of the scarf darker, and you can see I'm using the side of my pencil. So by using the side of my pencil, I am getting a lot more value on that paper a lot quicker than if I was using the point to work with hatching and cross-hatching. So using the side of the pencil, building up the value. There I'm just getting that scarf, working with the scarf, the edges getting a little bit darker, blocking in the shadow of the nose. Now in a later video, I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna work up those details on the face. But in this video, I really want to just get the masses of light and shadow. Right now, I'm starting to use the graphite powder. And in order to apply it to my drawing, I have an old, round, soft watercolor brush that I'm kind of just pushing the graphite powder onto the drawing. And if you compare what I'm doing to the photo, what you'll see is I'm really carefully studying the shapes of the lights and the shadows, and I'm leaving the areas white where there's light. So I started with the bunny there, and now I'm working up into Arlo, and that, the whole right side of Arlo is in shadow, and then his belly is a little bit darker there than his shoulder area, so I wanted to tone that down. And then his hips are really quite a bit darker. Now I'm going to start working with the background. And so I'm continuing to just brush the graphite powder all over the background. Now you may remember when I was first looking at this photo, I had a big question about the rug. I knew that that was a kind of a complex texture on the rug, and it could be that you also have some complex textures maybe around your animal. Like, for instance, maybe your animal is outside and standing in the grass or in the dirt or on stones or something like that. So you may have to deal with texture, surface texture of something in addition to having to deal with drawing the fur. And so I think it's really helpful to watch this part if that's the case with your animal. Right now, after I brushed around all the graphite powder and I toned down all the shadow areas, I'm going back in, and again with this type of tonal drawing, I am not building the darks up gradually. I'm just going right in there with a soft pencil, and I'm using a 4B, and here I'm just building up the shadow a little bit. Now, do you see those strokes that I'm making going up along the side of Arlo? That's because I wanted that edge to look soft and furry. So, that's going to be one of the challenges with your animals, is having the edges of your animals look like they're soft and furry or feathery, depending on what your animal is. So there's a darker area there, between his two arms. And here, see what I'm doing? I'm pulling up my strokes. So I'm making the furry edge of Arlo. And here I decided his belly was a little bit too dark, so I'm using that eraser I made with the wedge shape to erase some of the lights. All right, now I'm going for it. I'm using a 4B pencil, and I am being really inventive and kind of creative about how I'm making this texture of the rug. So I'm following the angle of the woven lines, and as you can see in the photo, they're slanting down a bit. Now I was working a little bit there on the cast shadow of the bunny's leg because it's up in the air, and here I am continuing to work on those ridges in the carpet, in that little rug that we see. And I'm using that soft 4B pencil and making those bumpy kind of ridges. Now, if you study the photo, you'll see that the highest contrast on that rug is going to be on the bottom. The bottom of the drawing is the foreground, and that's the part that's closer to the viewer. Now, I also see some lines that are kind of going up pretty much vertical. And here I go, I'm going to continue working back and getting those ridges on there. They get a little bit straighter as I go back. Now I'm going fast, and some of my marks on the back of the rug got a bit dark. I'm going to have to go tone those down. I want less contrast in the background. Okay, there I'm adding some of those vertical lines that go down in the rug. So I want more contrast in the foreground. I want the darks darker in the foreground and the lights lighter. So I'm just darkening up some of the shadow there underneath the bunny, adding a little more darks there, and then working back into that rug, and continuing to work on those ridges. So the idea when you're working with texture, and if you don't want to do anything that, like, there's no reason for me to draw the rug exactly the way it looks. What I'm trying to do is suggest the texture of the rug. And here I'm fixing the edge of Arlo again and just adding a little bit of dark shading for the fur and working back into the rug. So you can see how I kind of go back and forth. Now, what I'm doing is I'm using a kneaded eraser to erase some of those lights. And you see the kneaded eraser. And I noticed that the rug is kind of bumpy. And so I am using that kneaded eraser, and there I'm going kind of up and back, picking out some lines, some little highlights on the rug to give it more of a bumpy texture. And I don't take the highlights all the way to the back of the rug, because again, I really want the back of the rug to be toned down, and I want less contrast back there. So it's just darkening up that area, working on the bunny now. And I'm making some very short textural marks on the bunny. And if you're drawing an animal that has short hair, you're going to really want to watch what I do when I'm working on the bunny, because he has short hair. It's not as long as Arlo's curly hair. Just touching up the eye a little bit on the bunny. And then I decided I needed to bring back some more of the graphite powder. I wanted to tone that down on Arlo's side and the side of the bunny's head a little bit more. So you can work back and forth like that. Now I'm going for it. I got a 6B pencil. I'm really darkening up that area right in there. Continuing to work, just suggesting some of the ridges over there.